The bright, fluorescent lights of the emergency room flickered as Lizzie sank into the cold, stiff chair, her body shaking uncontrollably. Her eyes were wide with shock and red-rimmed, scanning the chaotic stream of nurses and doctors rushing past. The stark white walls, usually the backdrop to her professional calm, now seemed to wrap around her, a stark reminder of her vulnerability. "Lady, can you hear me?" A gentle voice broke through her fear. Startled, Lizzie looked up into the concerned eyes of a young doctor, his face surrounded by black hair, his eyebrows furrowed with worry as he took in her disheveled appearance, the bruises on her pale skin, her clothes slightly disheveled. "Yes, I can hear you," Lizzie stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. She clung to the fabric of her scrubs, her fingers twisting the material as she tried to steady herself in the moment. "What happened to you?" the doctor asked, his voice gentle but urgent. He pulled up a stool, his eyes never leaving her face, a supportive gesture that felt incredibly comforting in the cold, impersonal space of the hospital. Lizzie opened her mouth to speak, but the words got stuck in her throat. How could she explain the terror that had followed her here, the terror of seeing her husband's face twisted into a mask of anger? "My husband, he beat me," she tried to say. The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. The doctor nodded, not pushing her any further, sensing her discomfort. He reached out, a gentle touch on her arm as he checked her vitals. "You're safe here, Lizzie," he assured her, glancing at her name tag before looking into her eyes again. "We'll take care of you." As he tended to her wound, cleaning the cut with ease, Lizzie felt the knot of anxiety in her stomach ease a little. The kindness in his actions, the genuine concern in his eyes. It was a balm to calm her frayed nerves. However, beneath the surface, her mind was racing, replaying the night's events like a scary movie that she couldn't stop. Suddenly the doctor stopped, his movements stopping as he looked at her with clear recognition. "Wait, Lizzie, don't I know you? From that night 6 years ago? I'm sure it was you." Lizzie's heart was pounding. She looked at him, really looked, and the memories came flooding back. On the rainy night, the boy was desperate in the restaurant. The face in front of her now realized the transformation. "Rufus," she breathed out, her tone filled with disbelief. "Yes, it's me, Rufus," he confirmed, a slow smile spreading across his face, turning it into the warmth of recognition. "You helped me, remember. You were my guardian angel when I had no one." Tears welled up in the corners of Lizzie's eyes as she understood the impossibility of the situation. Here he is, the boy she saved, now saving her. What a funny fate. I can't believe it's you." "How?" Rufus's smile turned wistful. "It's a long story, but let's focus on you now. You need to take care of these wounds first." The safety and empathy in his voice coaxed her forward, urging her to reveal the truth. With a deep, shaky breath, Lizzie began to unravel her story. She told of the escalating abuse, the violence of the night, and her desperate escape. Each word lifted a small burden from her shoulders, the act of sharing her fears and pain with Rufus like a small stitch in her healing heart. Rufus listened intently, his expression a mixture of anger and sadness as he absorbed her words. "I'm here for you, Lizzie. Just like you've been there for me," he reassured her, his voice firmly filled with promise. As Rufus tenderly applied a bandage to her bruised wrist, Lizzie's mind began to drift back to the first time they had met, a night that had remained etched in her memory as if it were only yesterday. The persistent rain pounded against the diner's windows, creating a gloomy rhythm that seemed to echo Lizzie's own restless thoughts. Inside, the diner is a warm refuge from the storm, bathed in the soft glow of overhead lights. Lizzie, exhausted from the night shift, is grateful for the familiar comfort of the 24-hour diner. "Another rough night?" Leo, the owner, asked as he pushed the plate containing her familiar hamburger across the counter. "You wouldn't believe it if I told you," Lizzie sighed, forcing a weak smile as she picked up the burger. "It felt like I went through an entire TV season in one night." Leo chuckled, wiping his hands on his apron. "This store owes you more than just a paycheck for all that." Just as Lizzie was about to answer, the door opened with a strong gust of wind, leading in a young man whose appearance made her stop mid-sentence. His clothes were torn and stuck to his skinny body, and his hair was stuck to his forehead because of the rain. His eyes were wide and desperate, scanning the room in panic. "Please help me! They are chasing me!" he cried out, his voice shaking with fear. The restaurant fell silent, the atmosphere tense as the customers turned to stare. Leo's face hardened as he walked towards the newcomer. "Get out of here! I don't want any trouble in my premises," Leo barked, pointing aggressively towards the door. "But please, I need help," the boy begged, his voice trembling. Lizzie watched the scene unfold, and her heart sank. Seeing someone else in trouble and not helping was harsh. Too harsh for someone who clearly needed her help. The boy almost knelt down and begged for help, but only received Leo's harsh attitude. Lizzie felt a surge of compassion that she couldn't ignore as the boy stumbled out of the store. "Leo, how can you be so cruel?" she exclaimed, her voice filled with disbelief and disappointment. "He's nothing but trouble, Lizzie. You know I can't have that here. A dirty person like this only brings bad luck. Who knows what else he might want to steal?" Leo muttered, avoiding her eyes as he went back to wiping down the counter. Lizzie couldn't let it go. She tossed some cash on the counter and grabbed her coat, her decision made instantly. Stepping out into the rain, she called out into the darkness. "Hey, wait!" The young man stopped, his figure almost invisible under the dim streetlights. "Who are you?" he asked cautiously, his body tensing as if preparing to run away. "I'm Lizzie. I'm a nurse intern. I want to help," she said, slowly approaching, her arms outstretched to show that she meant no harm. "Why are you helping me?" His voice was a mixture of doubt and hope, a contrast that made Lizzie's heart flutter. "Because it was the right thing to do," she replied, her voice gentle but firm. "Come on, let's get you out of this rain." She opened her bag and stood closer together. They walked silently back to her apartment, the rain covering them like a cold, wet shroud. Once inside, Lizzie led him to the bathroom where he could warm up and clean himself up. "My name is Rufus," he said, as he accepted the towel she offered him, his eyes looking at her with gratitude. "What happened to you, Rufus?" Lizzie asked while preparing dry clothes for him. I was running from some people. I don't really want to talk about it," he replied hesitantly. "Thank you for this, for helping me." "Don't mention it. You're safe here," Lizzie assured him, her voice imbued with a warmth that she hoped would soothe his fears. While Rufus was taking a shower, Lizzie spread a blanket and pillow on the sofa. She couldn't help but feel a deep connection to this stranger, whose life had temporarily collided with hers under such tragic circumstances. When Rufus reappeared, a little cleaner and calmer, he found Lizzie in the kitchen heating up some soup. "Here, eat something. You'll feel better," she said, handing him a bowl full of steaming soup. Rufus nodded and took the bowl, his hands shaking slightly. "I don't know how to thank you," he whispered, the warmth of the soup seeming to melt the ice inside him. "You don't need to thank me," Lizzie replied, sitting across from him at the small kitchen table. "Now go to sleep, and we'll discuss everything tomorrow morning when you're more stable." The morning light had barely begun to seep through the curtains when the sound of the front door slamming jolted Lizzie awake. Her heart pounded with a sudden fear as she recognized the heavy footsteps of Bart, her boyfriend, who wasn't supposed to return until the following day. Panic gripped her as she realized Rufus was still in the shower, the sound of running water now a dreadful noise in the ominous silence of the apartment. Bart stormed into the bedroom, his face twisted in anger. "Lizzie! What the hell is going on here? Who's in the shower?" he demanded, his voice dangerously low. "Bart, it's not what you think," Lizzie began, her voice trembling as she tried to intercept him, hoping to prevent a confrontation. "Don't Bart me, Lizzie! Who is in our bathroom?" he roared, pushing past her toward the bathroom door. Lizzie's plea escalated into desperation. "Please, listen to me. He's just someone who needed help." The bathroom door swung open and Bart's fury boiled over upon seeing Rufus, who, caught off guard, clutched a towel around his waist. "Who the hell are you?" Bart bellowed, stepping menacingly into the small room. "Bart, stop! He was in trouble. I couldn't just leave him out there." Lizzie's voice broke as she followed, trying to grab Bart's arm. Ignoring her, Bart lunged at Rufus, his fists clenched. "You think you can come into my house?" he shouted, swinging a punch that caught Rufus off guard and sent him staggering back against the sink. Rufus, trying to shield himself, pleaded, "I don't want any trouble. Lizzie just helped me out, that's all." Bart's response was a snarl of derision. "Helped him out? Or maybe you're just cheating on me, huh? Is that it?" "Bart, please, it's not like that," Lizzie cried, her voice a mix of panic and frustration. She stepped between them, pushing Bart back with all her strength. "He needed help. I'm a nurse. That's what I do." But Bart was beyond reason, his eyes clouded with jealousy and rage. "And what about me, huh? You spending my money on this nobody, while I can't even get a decent drink? Your money. I'm the one working all the hours while you—" Lizzie stopped herself, realizing, too late, that her words would only inflame the situation. "That's right, you work. And what do I get from it?" "Nothing," Bart shouted, his face red with anger. He shoved Lizzie aside harshly, making her stumble back against the wall. "You're useless, Lizzie. All this time, and you can't even provide properly for me." Tears streamed down Lizzie's cheeks, her body shaking as the harsh words cut deeper than any physical wound. "I help people, Bart. That's what I'm supposed to do. Why can't you see that?" Rufus, now dressed but still visibly shaken, intervened, stepping forward with a protective stance. "Stop talking to her like that. She's done nothing wrong." Bart whirled on Rufus, his expression one of utter contempt. "And you? Stay out of this. You have no idea what you've walked into." The situation was spiraling dangerously out of control. Lizzie, her voice barely audible over the sound of her own sobs, tried once more. "Bart, please, let's just talk about this. He was in danger. I did what I had to do." But Bart was not to be calmed. "Talk? With you harboring some guy in our home? You've crossed a line, Lizzie." His voice was a venomous whisper as he backed away, his eyes never leaving hers. "This isn't over." With that, he stormed out of the apartment, slamming the door behind him, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. As the door slammed shut behind Bart, the apartment seemed to tremble with the echo of his departure. Lizzie sat huddled on the floor, her sobs diminishing into shuddering breaths, while Rufus lingered, a look of profound guilt etching his features. "Lizzie, I'm so sorry," Rufus stammered, his voice laden with regret. "This is all my fault. I shouldn't have stayed. I'll leave right now. I don't want to cause you any more trouble." Lizzie looked up, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. a weary smile trying to find its place on her lips. "Rufus, you didn't do anything wrong. It's not your fault. But he's always been difficult. He'll be back when he runs out of money for his drinks and bets." "But how can you live like this?" Rufus asked, his voice tight with concern. He knelt beside her, his eyes searching hers for an answer. "You don't deserve to be treated that way, Lizzie. You should think about leaving him. You deserve so much better." Lizzie's eyes met Rufus's and a sad laugh escaped her. "It's not that easy, Rufus. It's complicated," she said, her voice a whisper of resignation. "Nothing about this is right, Lizzie. You help people every day, and here you are, needing help yourself and not taking it," Rufus replied, his tone gentle yet insistent. "Please think about what you're staying for. Is this love? Because love shouldn't hurt like this." Lizzie sighed, a deep, soulful sound that seemed to carry the weight of her world. "I know, Rufus. I know. But it's scary to think about leaving, about being alone." "You won't be alone," Rufus assured her, his hand reaching out to squeeze hers reassuringly. "You have friends, people who care about you. You have me, even if I'm not here. You can call me anytime." "Thank you, Rufus. I don't know what I would have done tonight without you," Lizzie said, a genuine smile breaking through her tears. "You have already done more for me than you know." Rufus stood, his figure stiffening as if bracing against an invisible force. "Then I'll go now. I don't want to make things worse for you when he comes back. Just, please, take care of yourself, Lizzie." Lizzie nodded, her heart heavy. "I will. And you take care too, Rufus." Rufus gave a small, resigned smile as he picked up his few belongings. Before he stepped out, he turned to look at Lizzie one last time, his gaze conveying a mix of concern and admiration. "Remember, you deserve happiness, don't settle for less," he said, then quietly closed the door behind him. As his footsteps faded away, Lizzie sat back against the wall, Rufus's words echoing in her mind. The room felt emptier, the silence louder. Bart's looming return hovered in her thoughts like a dark cloud. She knew Rufus was right. She deserved better. The thought of standing up for herself, of choosing a different path, was terrifying, yet held a flicker of hope. For the first time in a long time, Lizzie began to contemplate the possibility of a life free from fear and full of the respect and love she so dearly provided to others, yet was denied herself. Lizzie sat alone in the dim light of early morning. The quiet of the apartment did not bring a feeling of comfort. As she mulls over her tumultuous relationship with Bart, memories of their past begin to swirl in her mind, each tinged with a bittersweet feeling that makes her heart ache. Throbbing. It all started in high school, a simpler time when they were just teenagers with hopeful smiles and dreams beyond the horizon. Bart had been charming back then, his grin and carefree laugh drawing her in like a moth to a flame. They were inseparable, holding hands down the school hallways, their youthful love blossoming amid the chaos of teenage life. After graduating, their paths took completely different turns. Lizzie has always been motivated. Her passion for helping others led her to nursing school where she excelled. Bart, on the other hand, stumbles. He was not accepted into college, his dreams were shattered, leaving him adrift. Despite his defeat, Lizzie still stands by him, her love unwavering. "I'll support you, Bart," she had said one evening, their hands clasped together as they sat on the old couch in her small apartment. "We'll get through this together. You can try college again next year." Bart looked at her then, his eyes filled with gratitude, and something darker, something Lizzie didn't realize at the time. "You're amazing, Lizzie. I don't know what I would do without you." But as the years passed, the promise of next year for Bart kept getting pushed further into the future. Lizzie works long shifts at the hospital and is physically and mentally tired, but she still comes home to cook, clean, and manage their finances, all the while saving money for Bart to retake the entrance exam. But the money she saved often disappeared on Bart's nights out with friends, and his excuses became increasingly flimsy. "Why do you need more money, Bart?" Lizzie asked one night, her patience fading as she noticed another withdrawal of their savings. "I thought you were going to study this weekend." Bart shrugged, avoiding her eyes. "I need to relax a bit, honey. Studying is stressful, you know." But Lizzie knew better. Learning never happens. The promises are empty. However, she stayed. Sitting there, in the cold dawn, Lizzie pondered the painful question that had haunted her for months. Does she truly love Bart? Or does she cling to him out of a desire for attachment, for a relationship that once promised so much joy? "I've invested so much, I've given so much away," she whispered to the empty room, her voice echoing ghostly. "Is it love? Or am I afraid to admit that it was all in vain?" Her mind recalls years of sacrifice, deferred dreams, and unrequited love. With each passing year, the vibrant girl with the dream of saving lives grows increasingly dim, exhausted by the constant exhaustion of a partner who takes but never gives. Years had passed. Yet here she was, married to Bart, caught in a marriage that felt more like a trap than a partnership. Despite her hopes and efforts, Bart had given up on retaking his college entrance exams and had instead sunk deeper into gambling and drinking. Their financial situation, always precarious due to his habits, had now become dire. One cold evening, as Lizzie returned home after a grueling double shift, she found Bart sprawled on the couch, a bottle of cheap whiskey clutched loosely in his hand, and the glow of the television flickering over his unshaven face. "The rent's due tomorrow, Bart. Did you manage to get anything from your last job?" Lizzie asked wearily as she hung her coat and kicked off her shoes, bracing herself for another excuse. Bart's response was sluggish, slurred by alcohol. "Nah, babe, the job fell through. But don't worry, I've got a plan. I'm hitting the casino tonight, feeling lucky." Lizzie's heart sank. This was not the first time she had heard such promises, such excuses. "Bart, we can't keep doing this. We're already behind on the bills. Gambling isn't a plan. It's what got us here in the first place." Bart sat up, irritation flashing in his eyes as he took a swig from his bottle. "What do you want me to do, huh? Jobs aren't exactly lining up for guys like me. The casino's the best shot we've got." "Best shot? No, Bart, it's the worst shot. It's what's been pulling us down for years." Lizzie's voice rose in frustration, her exhaustion turning into anger. "We are drowning here, and all you do is gamble our last pennies away." Bart stood, swaying slightly as he faced her. His voice grew loud, defensive. "You think I don't know that? You think I enjoy living like this?" His words slurred together, his frustration palpable. "I'm doing what I can, Lizzie. Maybe if I win big, we can turn everything around." Lizzie shook her head, despair washing over her. "And what if you lose, Bart? What then? We lose everything. That's what happens. We've been through this cycle before." "Then what do you suggest, huh? You want to leave? Go on then." Bart gestured wildly towards the door, his anger flaring. Lizzie paused, her eyes welling up with tears, not from his words, but from the sheer helplessness of their situation. "I don't want to leave, Bart. I want us to fix this. Together. But that means you have to stop gambling. We need to find another way." Bart's gaze faltered and he sank back onto the couch, his energy seeming to deflate. "I don't know if I can," he muttered, almost to himself, the fight going out of him as quickly as it had flared. Lizzie approached cautiously, her tone softening. "We can find help, Bart. There are programs, counselors. We don't have to do this alone, but you have to try, for us." For a moment, there was a flicker of something in Bart's eyes, a spark of the man Lizzie had once believed he could be. He nodded slowly, the fight drained from him. "Okay," he whispered. "I'll try. For us." Lizzie felt a small glimmer of hope, fragile but real. Lizzie's long 12-hour shift at the hospital had been grueling, and she was looking forward to the comfort of home, clinging to the fragile hope that Bart was finally ready to turn things around. The small, tentative discussion from the night before, where Bart had whispered a promise to try, had kindled a flicker of hope in her weary heart. As she unlocked the front door of their apartment, however, her hopes were immediately dashed. The sight that greeted her was chaotic. A trail of clothing strewn from the hallway leading into the living room, including pieces of women's lingerie that were definitely not hers. A cold dread settled in her stomach as she followed the trail up the stairs, her tired mind refusing to acknowledge the implications of what she might find. Pushing open the bedroom door, the last shreds of her denial were shattered. Bart was there with another woman, their entangled forms a stark betrayal against the backdrop of their shared bed. The room spun around Lizzie as a visceral roar of betrayal and hurt escaped her lips. "What the hell, Bart?" Lizzie screamed, her voice hoarse with shock and anger. Bart scrambled upright, his expression morphing quickly from shock to defiance. "Lizzie, this isn't what it looks like," he stammered, attempting to cover his guilt with feeble excuses. "What it looks like is that you're cheating on me in our own bed." Lizzie's voice escalated, her initial shock giving way to a searing anger. The other woman, clutching the bedsheet to her, looked on wide-eyed, making no move to speak. Bart's face hardened as he stood, stepping between Lizzie and the stranger in a protective stance that was absurdly out of place. "How dare you!" Lizzie tried to push past him, her hands balled into fists. "After everything I've done for you, after all the promises." "You're overreacting, Lizzie. Besides, if you took care of yourself a bit more, looked a bit nicer, maybe I wouldn't need to find someone else," Bart snapped, his words slicing through the tense air, cruel and cutting. The hurt from his words was almost physical, but the pain only fueled Lizzie's anger. "Get out of my house!" she shouted, her hands balled into fists at her sides. Lizzie lunged towards the woman, but Bart's reaction was swift and brutal. His hand shot out, grabbing Lizzie harshly by the arm, yanking her back. "You're ugly when you're angry, you know that?" he sneered, his grip tightening painfully. His hand shot out, striking her across the face with a force that sent her reeling backward. The sharp sting of the slap was quickly followed by a brutal kick to her stomach, doubling her over in agony. The room spun around Lizzie as she struggled to maintain her balance, her breaths coming in sharp, painful gasps. The woman on the bed scrambled to dress, her earlier complacency replaced by fear. The physical pain from his grip and the emotional torment from his words were too much. Lizzie tried to pull away, but Bart was too strong. In a blind rage, he shoved her hard against the wall. The impact sent a sharp pain through her shoulder, and she crumpled to the floor, her breath ragged as she tried to comprehend the situation. "I should have left you years ago," Bart spat out as he turned his attention back to the woman, who was now dressed and practically running out of the room. Shaking, more from fear and shock than from the physical pain, Lizzie knew she had to leave. The situation had escalated beyond anything she could handle alone. Ignoring Bart's taunting, she grabbed her phone and purse and fled the house, her body aching, but her spirit determined to seek help this time. Outside, the cool night air hit her like a balm. but the emotional turmoil roiled inside her like a storm. As she hurried away from the house, the reality of what had happened, of what her life had become, settled heavily on her shoulders. Back in the safety of the hospital room, Lizzie felt the world steady itself around her. Rufus sat beside her, his presence a comforting balm to the wounds left by Bart's betrayal and violence. As she took in his concerned expression, a mix of gratitude and despair washed over her. Here was the man who had once been a desperate stranger she had helped, now promising to protect her. "Lizzie, I promise you're safe now," Rufus said firmly, reaching out to take her hand. "I won't let anyone hurt you again." Lizzie looked at him, her eyes welling up with tears, not just from her physical pain, but from the emotional release of finally being free from Bart's tyranny. "I don't know how to thank you, Rufus. After everything that's happened, I'm ready to start over. Truly start over." Rufus squeezed her hand reassuringly. "And you will. We'll make sure of it." His voice was calm and resolute, a stark contrast to the chaos she had escaped. As Lizzie settled more comfortably into the hospital bed, Rufus began to share more about his life, revealing secrets he had long held close. "There's something I haven't told you, Lizzie, about why I was in such danger the night we met," he started, his voice soft but steady. "I am the son of a senator. My kidnapping was orchestrated by political rivals of my father, aiming to coerce him by threatening my life." Lizzie listened in shock, her brows knitting together in concern. "That's horrifying, Rufus. I had no idea." Rufus nodded. "It's something I've tried to put behind me, but thanks to you, I escaped that night. Your kindness didn't just change my life, it saved it. That's why I became a doctor, to help others as you helped me." The weight of his confession hung in the air, intensifying Lizzie's feelings of connection and admiration toward him. Here was a man who had transformed his trauma into a force for good. It was inspirational and gave her hope that she, too, could transform her own pains into something meaningful. In the days that followed, as Lizzie recovered physically, Rufus was a constant presence. He helped gather the necessary evidence of Bart's abuse, encouraging her to press charges. With Rufus's support, Lizzie found the strength to take legal action. Bart was arrested, and a restraining order was placed against him, ensuring he could no longer come near her. As the legal proceedings took their course, Lizzie's feelings for Rufus deepened. The bond that had begun with an act of kindness years ago now blossomed into something profound. They shared long conversations about their hopes and dreams, often finding solace in each other's aspirations. One evening, as they sat together in a quiet corner of the hospital's garden, Rufus took Lizzie's hands in his. "Lizzie, being with you through all this, I've realized something," he said, his eyes locking with hers. "I love you. I've fallen in love with you through your strength, your compassion, everything that you are." Lizzie felt her heart swell with emotion. "Rufus, I love you too," she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of her words. Here was a new beginning, a chance at a love built on mutual respect and profound connection. Months later, their relationship culminated in a beautiful wedding. Surrounded by friends and family, and many from the hospital who had supported them, Lizzie and Rufus vowed to be each other's support and sanctuary. The ceremony was filled with laughter and tears, a celebration of their journey and the love that had grown from the most unlikely circumstances. As they danced their first dance as husband and wife, Lizzie felt as if she were floating. Every step was a step away from her past her and toward a future filled with hope and love. "You were my angel in the rain, and now somehow I've become yours. Rufus murmured as they swayed to the music, their bodies close. And you've shown me that sometimes the most unexpected acts of kindness are the ones that lead us to our happiest destinies, Lizzie replied, her voice filled with wonder and joy. Their love story, born out of the darkest moments, had become a beacon of hope, not just for them, but for everyone who knew them. It was a testament to the power of kindness, the strength of the human spirit, and the boundless possibilities of new beginnings. As I stood at the back of the extravagant wedding hall, watching my ex-wife flaunt her newfound wealth and happiness, I thought I would be ridiculed by my ex-wife again. But as soon as the groom's father, upon hearing my name, he dropped to his knees before me, sending shockwaves through the room. "What the hell is going on here?" I muttered, bewildered by the sudden turn of events. "My name's Ron Lopez, just your average guy at the office. My days are pretty mundane, just shuttling between work and home with nothing particularly exciting to brag about. Back when I first joined the workforce, I had dreams of climbing the corporate ladder. But I'm not one for calculated moves, so I often find myself stuck with tasks nobody else wants. My inability to refuse just ends up being my downfall. Despite my hard work, I'm still just another face in the office, no fancy title to show for it. There was a time, though, when things were brighter and I smiled more often. I married my high school sweetheart, and for a while, life was good. It gave me the push I needed to excel at work. But that happiness didn't last. Seriously, living off this meager paycheck again? After several years of marriage, my failure to perform well at work consistently frustrated my wife, leading to frequent displays of her discontent. I apologize. I'm striving to improve. How many years have passed, and how often have those words been repeated? I envisioned our marriage bringing a better life, yet our limited income stifles us. I'm exhausted. My wife, Mary, has always had a penchant for indulging herself. Whether it's beauty treatments, cosmetics, salon visits, or clothes, her greatest pleasure lies in maintaining her appearance. It appeared she married me, expecting a life of luxury because I am the son of a doctor. True, my father is a doctor with his own practice. However, much like me, he used to treat his patients at nominal fees, often providing care without seeking profit, particularly for those with financial difficulties. People can pay back when they recall it in the future, as long as they are alive to do so. Money can't be generated if you are not alive, my dad used to say. Due to this, despite being a doctor's family, we never lived a wealthy life. Of course, as a child, I never felt dissatisfied or doubted this way of living, and I'm still proud of my dad to this day. However, Hannah decided to marry me, categorizing me as a doctor's son without knowing this background. So, it turned out to be a completely different life than she had planned. And a few years later, I've had enough. If this is all we can do, there's no point in being with you. Let's get a divorce. A divorce. Hold on, please. How many years do you think I've waited? I age just as much as you do. I need to redo my life while I still can. I definitely don't want to be a low-income wife like you for the rest of my life. With those harsh words, Hannah left, leaving only the divorce papers behind. I was mad at myself for not realizing Mary's true nature and for not being able to prove her were on G with my job performance. 5 years have passed since then. I threw myself into work to heal the emotional wounds. But being not savvy, I still couldn't achieve outstanding performance at work, remaining a regular employee. If this continues, what Hannah said would turn out to be true. I feel utterly miserable. During that time, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. From Mary. What does she want now? Inside the letter from my ex-wife, Mary, who I hadn't heard from in a long time, was a wedding invitation. It seems that Hannah is remarrying someone else. Why would my ex-wife send me an invitation? As I looked at the postcard, puzzled, I noticed a familiar chapel name written on it. This place, isn't it a super luxurious hotel? Knowing Mary, she must have chosen a rich man to be her partner this time as well. I could easily guess that she intended to flaunt her happiness in a luxurious hotel wedding, just to rub it in and show the difference between her life now and the life she had with me. I don't owe her to attend. I mean, I was the one who got dumped. But maybe for Hannah as well, me not succeeding in my job was an unexpected turn of events. After pondering for a while, I sighed deeply and stood up from my seat. This is the last time, I guess I'll just go. I knew attending the wedding would shatter my pride, but I decided to go anyway. Despite that, Hannah was willing to stay by my side for several years, even though she had to put up with me. I can somewhat understand her desire to show me that she's finally happy as a form of revenge. From an outsider's perspective, she might seem too kind-hearted. Nevertheless, I chose to attend her wedding. On the day of the wedding, we were blessed with perfect weather. I arrived a bit earlier than planned, and while sipping on my coffee in the lounge, I stared blankly out of the window. It was indeed her second wedding, so I recognized a few of Mary's friends who I had been introduced to before. Unexpectedly, I overheard a conversation from the seat next to me. After all, Hannah did an amazing job to get this wedding, didn't she? Yeah, it's in a luxury hotel. This time it's a level up from the first one. Yeah, she used to complain that her first husband was a doctor's son, but when she opened the lid, he was just an ordinary office worker without money. It's really unexpected, isn't it? Hearing them talk without realizing my presence, I felt a sharp pain in my heart. So, Hannah never really liked me for who I was. I realized that when we got divorced, but hearing it from someone else's mouth makes it even harder. Before she divorced her first husband, she had already set her sights on her current husband. I heard them say, "Really? Well done, Mary. Well calculated." I couldn't believe my ears. So that means Hannah was already in a relationship with her current partner before she even divorced me. My pride was shattered to pieces. She looked down on me so much, but she was the one cheating. I started to regret even being here. Trying to maintain composure, I took another sip of my coffee, but my hand was shaking. Hannah appeared in front of me, all prepared to move to the bridal room. "You really came. You're really a good person, right?" she said, sneering at me with a sigh. Trying to hold back my madness, I responded, "Well, consider it my last duty. Glad you could find happiness." I forced a smile. Not liking my attitude, Hannah continued to belittle me. "Isn't it wonderful? It's incomparable to the time with you. Here's a share of happiness for the poor bachelor. Be grateful, will you?" She laughed sarcastically. Just then, a refreshing-looking man spoke to her from behind. It was the groom, her new husband. "Mary, it seems like the relatives have gathered. Let's hurry to the bridal room." Her husband, Harry, glanced at me briefly and gave a slight nod. I reflexively nodded back. Perhaps the groom was unaware that Hannah had invited her ex-husband to the wedding. "There's still some time before the ceremony, so please make yourself comfortable," Harry said with a pleasant smile as they were about to pass by me. At that moment, an older man following the groom spoke to me. "Excuse me for asking, but may I have your name?" "Dad." "What's Ron?" "Top number, just curious," feeling uneasy under the groom's dad's serious gaze. I responded, "My name is Ron Mixer." "Lopez, is your father a doctor by any chance?" The groom's dad suddenly seemed frantic. Staggering a bit under his intense presence, I nodded to his question. Immediately the color drained from the groom's dad's face, and suddenly he raised his voice. "Harry, the wedding is off right now." "What? Huh? What are you talking about, Dad? What did you just say?" Caught off guard by this unexpected turn of events, I hurriedly stood up from my seat. No, I didn't do anything. While I was still in a state of panic, the groom's dad began to prostrate himself at my feet. People around the venue started to murmur and stir. "Dad, what are you doing?" "No, really, what?" Even as the groom urged his dad to lift his head, he stayed bowed down, pressing his forehead to the floor without changing his posture. I was completely lost and had no idea what was going on. Mary, caught in this embarrassing situation, turned red with anger and started to lash out. "Can we just talk about this? Lift your head, please." Trying to calm the situation, I persuaded the groom's dad to lift his head, and he began to plead for forgiveness, tears in his eyes. "I'm begging for your forgiveness. I've been unfaithful to Dr. Lopes." It seemed that the groom's dad, James, had some past connection with my dad. To understand the truth, I listened intently to Chuck's words as he began to speak hesitantly. The groom's dad. Chuck was a fellow doctor like my dad. The story dates back to my early childhood. When Chuck was still a trainee doctor at the hospital, my dad had just started his own medical practice. My dad was recognized for his skills at a renowned university hospital, and James, who was attending the Associated Medical School, looked up to him. He volunteered to train at my dad's hospital and learn various techniques. One day, Chuck's wife gave birth. However, the baby was found to have a congenital heart defect. The heart surgery required for the baby was risky, and the chances of survival were slim, which made the other doctors reluctant to perform the operation. Desperate, Chuck consulted my dad. My dad agreed to help and performed the heart surgery on the baby, saved the baby's life safely. However, the medical expenses for the baby saved the baby's life safely. However, the medical expenses for the baby's heart condition were substantial. Back in the day, James, who was a trainee doctor at the time, didn't have the means to pay it all back at once. With tears streaming down his face, he bowed deeply and asked my dad if he could repay the amount in installments. My dad just laughed, shook his head. "Someday, when you become a great doctor and have the time to remember me, come back and repay me then. I guarantee you'll definitely become a great doctor." He said this to keep Chuck from feeling too pressured. Sometime after, Chuck was sent abroad to study medicine and didn't return to the States for several years. Despite this, he never forgot his promise to my dad and continued to save money for the repayment. However, by the time he came back to the States, my dad's hospital was no longer there, the contact information had changed, and they had lost touch. The fact that he couldn't repay the money had always weighed heavily on his heart, and he had lived all those years without being able to do anything about it. Today, he unexpectedly spotted me at the hotel, his astonishment palpable. "You resemble your dad so much," he exclaimed. "I deeply apologize. Please, let me meet your father in person and make amends." Sensing Chuck's overwhelming emotions, I maintained composure. That's exactly what my dad would do, but unfortunately, he's no longer with us. As the news about his past acquaintance sank in, Chuck stood frozen, disbelief written all over his face. "Impossible," he murmured. He succumbed to cancer 3 years back after a relentless battle. He was constantly shuttling between clinics. A remarkable doctor, he prioritized his patients till his last breath. Chuck collapsed to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "Dad, this isn't the place," he choked. "Harry, that scar on your chest, it's evidence of Dr. Lopes' intervention, saving your life." Harry appeared speechless. "Your wedding today, your presence here, it's all thanks to Dr. Lopes." Charlize bowed once more, pledging, "I'm determined to repay the kindness owed to your dad. Please allow me." Rushing, I quickly helped Chuck to his feet, a smile spreading across my face. "James," I exclaimed, "I'm overjoyed. Just the thought of my dad fills me with happiness. The fact that the life he saved can now celebrate such a glorious day like today fills me with joy." It's incredible to connect with evidence of my dad's existence. I'm certain he'd be thrilled too." My words moved Chuck to tears once more. Amidst the cheers and applause of the crowd, Hannah shot me a furious glance. As the ceremony approached, emotions soared, and the event proceeded as planned. This unexpected encounter had transformed my wounded heart into one filled with pride and optimism. Later on, Chuck insisted on reimbursing the medical bills and the generosity my father had shown, resulting in a substantial sum of money being transferred to me, which he had set aside for my father. Additionally, Chuck's hospital initiated a partnership with my company, greatly enhancing my performance and leading to my long-awaited promotion. The benevolence and empathy my father displayed had come full circle. I treasured this joyous moment, reminiscing about the determined gaze in my father's eyes during his work. Regarding Mary, despite her contentment in her second marriage, her husband discovered her past involvement with me prior to our divorce, realizing that both her former and current marriages were driven by financial motives. Consequently, he grew weary of her, culminating in yet another divorce. I learned of this through hearsay. The principle of what goes around comes around resonates deeply with me, echoing my father's belief that even actions seemingly unrelated to personal gain can bring happiness to others. Witnessing someone smile today reaffirms that my life is indeed on the right path. In your opinion, what is the sweetest revenge for those who despise you? This woman was despised by her husband's family. Furthermore, they also took away the house she inherited from her deceased parents. They thought she would be weak and resigned like always. But no, this time she had her own plans to make her husband's family receive what they deserved. In an unexpected turn of events, our lives were turned upside down. My brother's generosity has thrown us a lifeline, offering us a future without the burden of rent or utility bills. It's Ashley who we're now counting on to guide us through this new chapter. My world revolves around the intricacies of finance, while Bob, my better half, is the wizard under the hood of any car. Our sanctuary is the house where my childhood memories play in every corner, a place not merely inherited, but charged with the legacy of a family empire. My father, once the commanding CEO, left his mark on every brick, instilling in us a sense of duty and ambition. It was my brother who was molded for greatness, his path illuminated by the halls of Oxford University, preparing him to inherit the mantle of leadership. Meanwhile, I've anchored my life in the familiarity of our family home, its walls echoing the laughter of generations. This house, now ours, sits strategically in the heartbeat of our town, where the rhythm of daily life is just a few steps from our doorstep. Trains, schools, and hospitals all within a stone's throw. As Bob and I navigate this unexpected gift, we're not just thinking about the here and now, but also the days when the echoes of our children's footsteps will be a distant memory. Thanks to my brother's invitation, the prospect of a future filled with ease and comfort seems not just possible, but within reach. So, in that sense, I'm grateful that my parents gave me this house. We were planning on expanding our family and living happily, but we never thought that our life would come to a sudden end because of such an incident. After moving into this house, my mother-in-law started to visit frequently. Knowing that my parents run a business, my mother-in-law often asks about money since we got married. "Hey, Ashley, how much assets do your parents have? When your parents pass away, how much will you inherit?" She often talks about these things, and I couldn't help but think that she was rather distasteful. I didn't want to be too blunt, so I replied, I wonder how much. I've never really thought about it, so I don't know. I've already received the house, so I might not get any money." Although I laughed and responded lightly, she said, "That can't be true, can it? Your parents are over 60. You never know what might happen." They must have discussed their assets with you." She seemed to be so interested in the asset discussion that at that moment I was convinced that she was counting on my parents' wealth. I already know how much I will receive, but I decided to keep silent, thinking it would be better not to tell my mother-in-law or my husband, who is close to her. However, an unthinkable incident occurred after this. Suddenly, without any notice, my mother-in-law and my brother-in-law's family moved into our house around 8 a.m. on a holiday. The doorbell rang unexpectedly, and when I opened the door, there were movers. Huh? Why are the movers here? As I was surprised and confused, my mother-in-law and my brother-in-law's family arrived and said, "We're going to be living here from today, so please take care of us." When I saw their grinning faces, I got chills down my spine. Just then, my husband woke up, and when I asked him to explain the situation, he said nonchalantly, "What's the problem if Mom and the others move into this house? It's so spacious, so you should be able to spare some room." He spoke as if it was only natural to give them some space. I was surprised enough that we were living together, but then my sister-in-law said something even more outrageous. We were invited by a brother, Ashley. Since he called us, we're not going to pay any rent or utilities, so we're counting on you, Ashley. About my brother-in-law, he intruded into various rooms without permission and said, "This room has good sunlight, so give it to us. Bob, move all the stuff in here out to the hallway." I felt dizzy at this exchange. This is my house, but they are opening rooms here and there, trying to use them as their own. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law's family have been lacking common sense for a while, especially my sister-in-law, who had rummaged through my bag without permission before. If things continue like this, they'll take over my room. Enough is enough. This is my house. Why are you acting like you own this place? I've had it. I want everyone to get out. I normally don't lose my cool or raise my voice in anger, but having these people move into the house my parents gave me without permission and treating it like it was theirs was something I could not stand. That's why I lost control of my emotions and shouted at all three of them. But then something unexpected happened. "How dare you talk to us like that? You're the one who should get out." The moment those words were spoken, I felt a severe pain in my cheek. Wait, did I get slapped? I realized what had happened a few seconds after being hit. I was stunned. I couldn't believe what had happened, and all that was left was a throbbing pain in my cheek. At that moment, I felt something snap inside me. It goes without saying, I can't live with people who would do something like this. But this house is mine. I don't want them living here like parasites. I packed up my things to leave the house, intending to inform my family about this. I had to find a place far away from home, so I rented a monthly apartment for the time being. From there, I would have to commute to work. The moment I told my parents about it over the phone, I could tell they were furious, even through the phone, especially my dad. He is very doting and has always adored me and my brother. He was a strict CEO, but as a father, he was always kind and quick to help when we were in trouble. I didn't want to involve my parents, who were just about to retire, in something like this, but I was forced to because my inherited house was being taken away from me while I was living in the monthly apartment. I was sure that my husband and his family were freely using my house, so I decided to do something that my brother and father suggested. A few days later, I checked my phone during my break and found dozens of missed calls and messages from my husband. Well, I knew why he was calling. I had called the water company and the electric company to cut off the utilities. Our house is all electric, so nothing works without electricity. And we haven't installed solar panels yet, so there's no way to supply electricity. It's very hot right now, so it must be pretty tough without electricity and water. The calls from my husband were probably to do something about it. Just as I was about to ignore it, my husband called again, timing it perfectly with my break. "Hey, what's going on? There's no electricity, and the water isn't working. You stopped the electricity and water, didn't you?" I could clearly imagine the panic state my husband was in from his voice over the phone. The house is mine. So now that I'm gone, there's no way I can leave the electricity and water on, right? That's why I had it cut off. If I left the utilities on, I would have to pay the bills even though I'm not living. There, I can't accept that, so naturally I had it cut off at this. My husband was furious and demanded that I renew the contract immediately just because he says to renew it. Doesn't mean I'm going to say, okay, I understand if they want to renew it. They should do it with their own money. But whenever it comes to this, they always say things like, it's your house, so you should pay. So their words and actions don't match. Anyway, I have no intention of renewing the contract or paying. If you don't like it, then get out of the house right away. After saying only that, I hung up the phone because my break was ending. Afterwards, my mother-in-law, my sister-in-law, and my brother-in-law all called me. All of them were saying the same thing. They wanted me to get the electricity and water hooked up. Their room was hot and uncomfortable. They said it was inconvenient without water. But all of this was their problem, not mine. After listening to everything they said, I told them to handle it themselves and hung up the phone. I figured they were just greedy for money and thought they would give up and leave soon. However, even after a week passed, there was no sign of them leaving. So I decided to push them further. I consulted with my father's company's lawyer about the situation and asked him to send a notice to my husband. The content of the notice was about trespassing. They had barged into the house I owned without any consultation, drove me out of it, and were using it as their own. I explained to the four of them who used this malicious tactic that I was considering taking legal action. Hey, what's going on? Why did I get such a document from a lawyer? Was it necessary to go this far? My husband, who seemed panicked and not expecting me to go this far, came to me for a settlement. Knowing how concerned they are about their public image, the prospect of being sued would be extremely damaging to them mentally. They definitely want to avoid dealing with a lawyer at all costs. But they don't want to give up their current lifestyle, so they're probably scheming to persuade me to let them continue their current lifestyle. I can see through what my husband is thinking like it's in the palm of my hand. That said, there's no way I can listen to what they have to say. So I didn't comply with my husband. At this, my husband finally exploded in anger, forgetting that he was at work, and yelled at me loudly, "Cut it out! Are you getting carried away? Just because we're a little underhanded doesn't mean you can act so high and mighty. Go back to how things were right now and drop the lawyer." Even though he yelled in anger, it didn't affect me at all. On the contrary, I was annoyed by his phone call, thinking, who do you think you are taking over someone else's house? No matter what you say or shout at me, my feelings won't change if you continue to squat there. I will take legal action. You better think hard before you act over the phone. My husband was still shrieking, but I ignored him and hung up the phone. This is a waste of time, and I've already talked to my lawyer about divorce. When I got home, I had received calls from my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, but I knew they were just going to talk about settling the matter. I didn't want to waste any more time, so I blocked their numbers to prevent further calls. After that, my prideful husband's family couldn't bear the idea of being sued, so they packed their bags and vacated the house. Then, the lawyer intervened, and the divorce negotiations proceeded smoothly. I also had a house cleaning service come in, and finally, I was able to return to my sparkling clean house. Living apart from my husband's family and in a monthly rental was comfortable, but of course living in my own home is the best. The house is pretty worn down in some places, so I need to consider renovating soon. I consulted with my father, and he introduced me to a good contractor, so I started consulting about the renovation. Living alone is really comfortable. I'm not bound by anyone. I can lie around on the sofa without getting scolded. I can eat whatever I want, without anyone saying anything. And while I was enjoying my current life, I received a contact from my ex-husband for the first time in 3 months. At first, I didn't answer the phone because I didn't recognize the number. But when the call kept coming from the same number, I thought it might be from a contractor, so I reluctantly answered the phone. However, as soon as I recognized the voice, my mood was completely ruined. It was from my ex-husband, whom I had divorced 3 months ago. I had already divorced him with the intervention of a lawyer. We even made a promise never to approach each other again. So what on earth does he want now? And changing his phone number just to call me is strange, no matter how you look at it. We promised, through our lawyer, not to see or contact each other again. There's nothing left for us to talk about, so please don't contact me anymore. Right as I was about to hang up the phone. Hold on a minute, please. I just need you to listen, just for a little while. I'm begging you. With that, he started yapping without any permission from me. Apparently, my ex-husband's company is facing serious financial crisis, and it's decided that his salary will be reduced. My mother-in-law's health is not good and she is unable to work. My sister-in-law and her husband can't contribute to the living expenses since he isn't working a steady job. My sister-in-law is working multiple part-time jobs, but most of her paycheck is being used to pay off the debt that my brother-in-law made. The situation was desperate as my ex-husband was trying hard to make ends meet, but with his salary getting cut, it will become increasingly difficult to survive. Well, hearing all that, I couldn't think of anything but, okay, is that so? Because they intruded into my house without my permission, did whatever they pleased, and then tried to kick me out. It's simply unbelievable. I feel nothing for the people who did such a thing, and I have no sympathy for them. Even if you tell me these things, it doesn't solve anything. It's your family. You should deal with it yourself. There's nothing I can do about it. There's nothing I can do. At my words, my ex-husband started to panic even more. Don't say things like that. We're in serious trouble. We won't even be able to pay the rent for the apartment and we'll be struggling for food tomorrow. Hey, we used to be a family, right? Please, help us. He pleaded in a voice close to crying, but I was not convinced. When I was in trouble, he did nothing to help and he looked down on me along with my mother-in-law. Just like my mother-in-law, my sister-in-law, and my brother-in-law have also always looked down on me. They insulted me for my plain appearance, or for my old-fashioned way of thinking. They told me not to come around because they said I was so stiff and outdated that it was rubbing off on them and they didn't care how hurt I was. As for my mother-in-law, she not only made things worse, but she also pushed me to have a baby as soon as possible, poured strange herbal medicines on me, made unnecessary doctor's appointments, and told all the neighbors that I was a barren wife. Looking back, there wasn't a single good thing about my marriage. My ex-husband, who used to be so kind before we got married, started to become my mother-in-law's puppet after the wedding. The first day, my mother-in-law was upset by this and cried to my husband. I wanted to see Ashley, but she wasn't there. I want to be friends with Ashley. I'm sad. After hearing his mother cry, my ex-husband yelled at me without listening to my side of the story. She said that she wanted to get along, but all she ever did when we met was badmouth me. My son seems to have lost weight recently. Is it because your cooking is so bad that he can't eat properly? She said things like this loudly whether we were at home or outside, so there was no way we could get along. My sister-in-law and brother-in-law also joined in laughing at me. I can't help people who act like this anymore. No matter what you say, my feelings won't change. I can't help you guys, so I'm going to hang up now and don't ever contact me again. With that, I finally hung up the phone and blocked the new number. Knowing my ex-husband, he might change his number and try to contact me again. So I decided to change my phone number at the store over the weekend. But before that, those four took action. They broke the promise of the lawyer and suddenly came to my house at 11 p.m. Open up, let us in, and take care of us. We're family. You should help us. They were banging on the door, yelling without considering the time. "Hey, what's the matter at this hour? Please go back home as it's causing a nuisance to the neighbors." When I went to open the door, they seemed ready to barge in, so I figured I'd try talking through the intercom. But the four of them didn't care, started banging on the door and raising a ruckus. I couldn't believe I was dealing with people this out of control. I was left holding my head in my hands. I was considering calling the cops when I heard sirens from outside. It looked like a neighbor had taken the initiative. As soon as they heard the police sirens, the surprise group thought I had called the police and tried to run away, but by then a crowd had gathered and escape was not an option. Following the incident, the police took my ex-husband, his friends and me to the station for questioning. I detailed the entire event to the authorities. Word of my ex-husband's actions quickly spread throughout our neighborhood. A co-worker of his was among the onlookers and shared the news at their workplace. By the next morning, everyone at his office was aware of the situation. He was already struggling financially due to a recent pay cut, but the involvement of the police made matters worse for him at work. The company decided to terminate his employment. Consequently, he was unable to keep up with his apartment rent. Financial strains also caused tensions with his sister's family, leading to the dissolution of their shared living arrangement. Now, Bob and his mother are residing in public housing. Both are juggling multiple part-time jobs in an effort to support themselves, with his mother also taking up part-time work to help out with their finances. She is a seamstress whose world is turned upside down when she falls in love with a rich young man from the rich part of town. Their love is forbidden, a modern-day Romeo and Juliet story, as his family despises her humble origins. She comes across an old woman whose presence seems to hold the key to a new beginning. Sophie made her way home, tears mingling with the rain that drenched her. The elegant dress she had donned for the day's solemn event now clung to her, and her hair lay in wet, lifeless strands against her face. She didn't even think to seek cover. The rain, in a way, felt fitting, camouflaging her tears as if they were just more drops in the downpour. Betrayal gnawed at her. The man she had revered as the epitome of bravery, reliability, and affection was now cowering behind his silent father's shadow, his mother's harsh words from the evening echoing in Sophie's mind. Lost in her distress, Sophie hardly realized when she arrived at her doorstep, a testament to how distress can warp one's perception of distance. She had unwittingly traversed about 5 kilometers. Standing there, Sophie hesitated. She couldn't let her mother see her like this. So, she decided to go to the mall nearby, dry off for a bit, have a cup of coffee at the food court, recover, and then put on one of her complacent smiles before showing to her mother. Taking care of her mother had become second nature to Sophie since she was a child. Sophie had witnessed her heart attacks many times before. Sometimes Helen had even been hospitalized. They had no relatives to look after the little girl, and as a result, the young Sophie was often left under the care of neighbors for several days or even weeks. Once Sophie overheard a conversation between her mother and her friend, and found out that she had been forbidden from having children at all. Then the girl, of course, asked her mother questions, and at first Helen denied everything, but eventually she confessed. "Yes, they warned me," her mother said, "but their predictions turned out to be wrong. They didn't believe I could carry you at all. They predicted I'd be dead by midterm. And then I thought, why should I live if I can't have you? You were already with me, living in my heart. How could I get rid of you?" No, it was the truest decision of my life. Sometimes Sophie felt guilty, believing that it was her fault that her mother had such health problems. But Helen, noticing this, always got angry with her. "Don't even think such a thing. I always wanted to have a daughter like you, and I am happy that I defied all predictions. And I was right, by the way. Yes, I have a heart condition, but who can guarantee it wouldn't have happened even without giving birth? I've had it since I was a child. At first, the doctor said I wouldn't survive pregnancy. Then they said I wouldn't survive childbirth. Later, they assured me that you would end up in an orphanage at the age of 2 or 3. And what do we have now? Helen often repeated to Sophie that she was the most precious gift that life had given her, and that having such a wonderful child was great happiness. Sometimes her mother would talk about Sophie's father. Sophie understood that her mother loved him deeply, even though she knew very little about him. They had met by chance, running into each other on the bridge. The handsome young man had come to the city for a student conference, while Helen was there on vacation for the first time in her life. She worked as a dressmaker in an atelier in a provincial town, and had been saving up money for a year to go on this trip. The two young people immediately liked each other. They spent 2 days walking together on the picturesque streets of the city and sitting in cafes. Mick proved to be an intelligent and interesting conversationalist, captivating the young girl. Helen fell in love at first sight, and at the end of the 2 days agreed to go up to his hotel room. Both believed it was just the beginning of their relationship, but fate had other plans. They agreed to meet at the square at lunchtime the next day, after Mick finished his studies. However, Helen never waited for her lover. At first she suspected that he had deceived her, but he looked at her with admiration, gently holding her hands. No, it couldn't be true. Eyes don't lie. The girl went to the hotel where the young man was staying. There she discovered that the students had been urgently taken away to some activity. You see, my daughter, he just couldn't come to the meeting. He couldn't escape. That's how we got lost. Sophie's mother sighed with a sad smile as she told her daughter the story. There was no social networks back then. No finding each other across the vast expanses of the country was impossible. We didn't have time to exchange addresses. I searched for him, tried to gather information about his city or university from the hotel staff. They refused, claiming it was confidential. I'm sure he was also trying to find me, but at least I still had you. How could I refuse such happiness? Remembering her mother's sad love story, Sophie settled down at a table that was hidden behind a column. She didn't want people staring at her right now. Crowds of people flowed on the upper floor of the shopping center, including couples in love. Young people were hugging and smiling at each other, just like she and Ron had been doing not long ago. The smiling waiter brought Sophie her coffee and wished her a good day. He appeared friendly, but in reality he was indifferent. It didn't matter to him what kind of day Sophie would have. It was just his job. The only person in the world who cared about she was her mother, and her health was deteriorating. Sophie held on to hope that Ron truly loved her too. He had told her so many times, but he was lying. Sophie savored the hot summer aromatic drink, finding pleasure in its warmth. It made her feel slightly lighter, if only for a moment. Maybe it wasn't such a bad thing that Ron had shown his true colors today. It would be much worse if their relationship became more serious, and only then would he reveal his true nature. Although, what could be more serious than what they had? Sophie had actually thought that he was about to propose to her. Why else would he suddenly introduce her to his parents? Wasn't that a sign of serious intentions? Sophie had recently graduated from sewing school and had become a dressmaker just like her mother. She had adored this craft since she was a little girl, dressing up her many dolls. She enjoyed coming up with interesting designs and selecting fabrics. It was like magic. A piece of fabric or a few scraps were transformed into a beautiful dress, turning any doll into a princess. Her mother worked long hours, leaving Sophie alone at home frequently, but the girl was never bored. Sewing distracted and entertained her and brought her pleasure. Her mother, coming from work, sincerely admired her daughter's creations and predicted her career as a fashion designer. She even met Sophie's main masterpieces to her own atelier and showed them to her colleagues. But of course, Sophie did not become a fashion designer. After finishing school, she attended sewing courses and became a seamstress. She now worked at an atelier close to home. She enjoyed her work and excelled at fitting outfits perfectly to the client's figures. Over time, she was entrusted with the most challenging cases, which she handled with ease. Sophie ordered another coffee to warm herself up. She didn't want to get sick and infect her mother. It could be very dangerous for her. Recently, Sophie had accomplished something almost impossible. She arranged a consultation with a renowned professor of cardiology, and it didn't cost her a thing. Her mother would undergo an examination by the best specialist in the field, who might prescribe a treatment plan to alleviate her condition. Despite being in her 40s, her mother struggled to breathe when walking, like a senior woman. The bathroom cabinet was filled with bottles of medication. All of this worried and frightened Sophie. Somehow, Ron distracted the girl from these sad thoughts. He transported her to another world simply by his existing. The son of wealthy parents floated through like a carefree butterfly, meeting friends, traveling and partying. Always smiling and cheerful, he seemed to radiate optimism to those around him. And of course, Ron was handsome, tall, athletic, and well-defined features, a wide, white-toothed smile, and charming dimples on his cheeks. He perpetually had a bronze tan on his body. Ron often traveled to soak up the sun and splash in the turquoise waves. In addition, Ron dressed stylishly and tastefully. He looked like a guy from a fashion magazine and could easily have become a model, but he had entirely different plans for his life. He was studying at a prestigious economic university, nearing the end of his penultimate year when he met Sophie. The upcoming year held a mixture of challenges and excitement for him: exams, writing his diploma, graduation, and then joining his father's business. His father was a well-known local businessman and owned a network of car services. What could possibly connect this representative of the golden youth and a financially struggling seamstress? Their fateful meeting took place in a nightclub. Sophie was not a fan of such places, primarily due to the high expense. She spent a quarter of her salary just to go to this club, which was quite irrational considering her situation. However, her childhood friend and neighbor Katie pleaded with Sophie to accompany her. How could Sophie refuse her? From the start, Sophie was not fond of the club. After taking a table, Katie immediately rushed to the dance floor. Sophie spotted her friend's silhouette amidst the dancing crowd and wondered what she found appealing about this place. The music was so loud that it felt like the eardrums were about to burst. It was stuffy, cramped, and smoky. But since she was already here, Sophie felt obligated to stay with her friend until the end. She couldn't leave her alone. Katie managed to coax Sophie onto the dance floor a couple of times. "Did you come here just to sit around?" Katie asked with eyes brimming with joy. And so Sophie danced among the crowd of young people. It was indeed enjoyable to let go and surrender herself to the rhythm of the music. During one of these moments, Ron approached her. He stood next to her and started dancing, imitating and complimenting Sophie's movements. The girl felt embarrassed and stopped dancing, but he smiled warmly and took her hand, leading her in a dance. He felt so skillfully and comfortably that it felt as if they were one. It was an irresistible sensation. While dancing, Sophie stole glances at her unexpected partner. He was undeniably handsome, stylish, and impeccably dressed. How could a guy like this even notice her? Perhaps the dance would end, and he would smile and return to his equally affluent friends. But Ron didn't leave. He asked for permission to accompany Sophie back to her table. Since Katie was still considering the dance floor, there was no one at the table. The young man asked to join Sophie. The girl's heart raced like a jackhammer. She couldn't believe that such a guy wanted to talk to her. They tried to have a conversation that evening, but the loud music made it nearly impossible. Nevertheless, Ron managed to show Sophie with compliments she had never heard before. "You are incredibly beautiful and graceful. Your eyes are stunning." The moment I saw them, something inside me turned over. Ron said this while looking directly into Sophie's eyes, and he appeared genuinely serious. It was clear that he wasn't joking, but expressing what he truly felt. Sophie was bewildered. Previously, she had only received compliments about her undeniable talent for sewing. She had no idea that she was beautiful. In school, boys never paid attention to her. They only noticed her classmates, who had more prominent physical features, while Sophie was skinny, tall, and angular. In sewing school, there were no guys, and the same was at work. Therefore, it was the first time Sophie had received such delightful compliments that had made her head spin. Of course, she immediately fell in love with Ron. In her eyes, he was the most handsome guy on earth. However, she couldn't believe that anything could be between them. They were too different. Ron asked Sophie for her phone number and she dictated it to him. He made a call to her phone to ensure she had his number, and then he escorted Sophie and Katie by cab. Katie tried to flirt with Ron all the way. She, heated up by drinks and bright emotions, did not immediately notice that Ron sympathized not with her. He politely deflected her advances, and this only made Sophie more captivated by him. Before saying goodbye, Ron kissed Sophie's hand. It was evident that he desired more to embrace her, perhaps even kiss her on the lips. Sophie sensed his longing, but Ron restrained himself and settled for an elegant gesture. Despite this, Sophie doubted whether Ron would call her back. The next day was a day off, and Sophie felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. On one hand, she longed for Ron's call and to experience the same emotions as the day before. On the other hand, she feared his disappointment. What if Ron finds flaws in the daylight, finds her boring, or realizes they are incompatible? The thought of seeing disappointment in his eyes scared her. When Ron called, he suggested picking up Sophie in an hour and taking a walk in the park and getting to know each other better. He confessed that he couldn't stop thinking about her after their meeting the day before. Sophie agreed with pleasure and began to prepare for the date with excitement. She tried on all the outfits and even applied light makeup, which she rarely did. She wanted to hide her fidgeting from her mother so as not to worry her. However, the woman noticed and asked with a smile, "Going on a date? I'm happy for you. Just be careful, okay?" "Don't worry, Mommy," Sophie assured her parent. "We're going to a crowded place." Sophie chose not to mention that she would be riding in the car of someone almost unknown to her. She couldn't prove that Ron was a good man, but she had seen his eyes, and that was enough for her to realize it. Sophie was not well versed in cars, but when she saw Ron's luxurious car, she was amazed. It was a dark blue, glossy, and streamlined model. The carriage is served. Ron smiled from the driver's seat. Sophie gathered her courage and got into the car. Despite the stark difference in wealth, Ron treated her sincerely, joked, complimented her, asked about her life, and shared about himself. Gradually, Sophie relaxed. Ron was natural, intelligent, and charming. He was nothing like the spoiled sons of rich parents. They took a leisurely walk in a beautiful park, admiring the fountains, feeding ducks, and laughing together. "I feel like I've finally met a soulmate," Ron shared his impression with Sophie. "You're so genuine, unlike anyone I've ever met. What about others?" Sophie smiled. "Are they artificial or something?" "Exactly. Artificial," exclaimed Ron. "That's the perfect word. Most girls are arrogant, demanding, and capricious. They see me only as a wallet, and for my appearance. I can sense it. But with you, it's entirely different." These words warmed Sophie's heart. It was delightful to know that she was special to Ron, not just one of many. "Yes, I can only empathize with you," the girl joked. "I guess you've been hanging around the wrong people." Apparently, Ron smiled warmly at her. Their romance felt like a fairy tale to Sophie. Ron made her surprises, showered her with compliments, took her to interesting and unconventional places in the city that she had never even known existed. He genuinely enjoyed her reactions, surprise and admiration. "You're so easy to please, so easy to surprise," he would often say. "It's wonderful. I feel like an entirely different person around you. I can't even put it into words." Ron was deeply impressed by Sophie's sincerity and spoiled nature. He took care of Sophie, aiming to please and protect her. It was incredibly heartwarming. For the first time, Sophie felt like a real princess, beautiful, delicate, and loved. She had never viewed herself in this way before. Helen noticed the changes in her daughter and knew about her boyfriend, and she began asking questions concerned about her daughter's choice. When she learned that he was wealthy, she became uneasy. "Be careful, daughter. Rich people often choose partners who are their equals, and with others they just have fun and spend time." "But what kind of stereotypes are those, Mum?" argued Sophie. "Ron isn't like that. Besides, it's the 21st century, and you're still clinging to relics of the past." "I just don't want him to break your heart," the mother said, shaking her head anxiously. But in the end, Helen was right. Time goes by, and nothing changes in the world. Perhaps Ron was initially captivated by Sophie. She was different from his previous girlfriends, modest, unspoiled, hard-working, without any whims, obedient, and full of admiration. Especially Sophie tried to please Ron by adjusting to his wishes and often agreeing with him, even when she had different thoughts. She wanted him to be happy with her. But they could not have a future together, of course. Only blinded by feelings, the girl refused to accept this fact. Sophie and Ron had already been together for almost a year. Relations between them had become more and more serious. She couldn't imagine life without him, and he also wanted to spend as much time with her as possible. However, Ron was finishing his studies, and his time was limited. One day they were looking at Ron's photos from his travels. "Someday I'll show you all this beauty. You'll look wonderful in a white swimsuit against the waves of the ocean. When I graduate, I'll announce that I have a fiancé." "Fiancé?" Sophie's heart sank. It seemed like a proposal. "Of course, my fiancé," Ron nodded. "What's wrong with that? It seemed obvious to me that we get married. It's not the right time yet, but the event is just around the corner." Sophie hugged Ron tightly, pressing herself against him and closing her eyes. She felt truly happy. Ron hadn't formally proposed to her. There was no ring or discussion of wedding plans, however. From that conversation, it was implied that they would marry sooner or later. After graduation from university, Ron started working for his father. As expected, he began earning a decent salary. Previously, his parents had supported him, which pleased him greatly. Sophie celebrated with him and dreamt that he would soon propose. However, several months passed after his graduation, and still no proposal came. Then, one day, Ron said that it was time for Sophie to meet his parents, as their relationship was serious. His family was eager to meet his chosen one. Sophie felt anxious about Ron's relatives. Family had always been important to him, and she didn't want to disappoint his parents. "Darling, why are you worried? Everything will be fine." As always, Sophie believed Ron's words without any questions. He had proven to be strong, reliable, and decisive. If he said everything would be fine, she trusted that it would be. The meeting was scheduled for Friday evening at one of the most luxurious restaurants in the city. Sophie checked out photos of the restaurant on social media and grew even more nervous. She always felt awkward in such settings, although Ron had invited her to similar places before. However, this time, she would have to interact with his parents, and she wanted to make a good impression on her future in-laws, hoping for peace, harmony, and warm relations in their future family. Sophie decided not to inform her mother about the upcoming meeting to prevent her from getting excited. Lately, her health had been deteriorating. She often felt dizzy and had heartaches. Even just getting to work was a struggle, as she had to stop and catch her breath at every dozen of steps. The doctors were dismissive, telling her, "What do you expect? You have a serious condition. We warned you not to have children, but you didn't listen. The disease is progressing rapidly. We're not miracle workers. We can't perform miracles." Each time Sophie went to the hospital, hoping for a new, effective treatment, she received the same response. But there was hope. A consultation with a renowned professor arranged by Sophie was scheduled soon. Sophie decided to take a bus to get to the restaurant instead of a cab because she wanted to save some money. Payday was still a week away, and most of her earnings for the month had already been spent on her mother's medicine. But the girl didn't mind the bus. She actually enjoyed riding on this public transport across the city, looking out the window. Sometimes she purposely chose longer routes to admire the city scenery and contemplate her own thoughts. However, this time, Sophie couldn't relax. Anxious thoughts kept winding through her mind. Intuition told her that the dinner wouldn't go smoothly. The bus was almost empty, as the rush hour had long passed. Sophie leaned her forehead against the cool glass and wondered if she should have worn a different outfit. The dress she wore was a decent length, but the shoulders were bare. Would Ron's parents consider it too revealing? Maybe she should have opted for a pantsuit instead. Sophie's thoughts were interrupted by a sharp shout from the conductor. And isn't it a shame to ride without a ticket at that age? Sophie looked towards the sound at the far end of the bus. An ugly scene was unfolding next to the driver's seat. The conductor, a burly woman with hair bleached with cheap paint and wearing an orange vest, hovered over a gaunt elderly woman. The elderly woman squeezed into her seat, tightly clutching a heavy bag filled with something, and glared at the conductor with defiance. "I'm telling you, young man, I'm going to the hospital to see my grandson. I spent my last money on treats for him, do you understand? I forgot to leave money for the ticket at all. Is it such a pity if I quietly ride a few stops? The bus is empty anyway, and if it gets crowded, I'll give up the seat. Whether it's empty or not, it's none of your business," the conductor angrily replied. "Your concern should only be paying for the ticket. Please pay the required amount or kindly leave the bus. If I let everyone ride for free, I would be fired." The elderly woman continued to explain that she was going to visit her grandson in the hospital and had bought him medicine, food, and other necessities. She desperately tried to reach the conductor's heart, but the conductor remained stubborn, demanding payment for the fare or asking the elderly woman to leave. Sophie felt a deep sympathy for the woman who was so eager to see her grandson. The fare wasn't a significant amount. Though Sophie wasn't wealthy, she knew she could spare some change for a good deed. "Here, I'll pay for this, Granny," Sophie said, handing some change. The conductor looked at the elderly woman contemptuously and gave Sophie a ticket. Sophie immediately handed the ticket to the old woman and intended to return to her seat. However, the grateful passenger grabbed Sophie's hand with her dry, unexpectedly strong palm. "Thank you for your kindness," she said fervently. "My name is Mrs. Looper. Don't think I'm some beggar. I have a good pension. I've worked at the factory all my life. It just so happens that today I spent every penny of it. Give me your phone number and I'll transfer the money to you as soon as I can." Sophie was taken aback by this surprise. It turned out that this old woman knew how to use mobile banking. Quite a modern elderly lady indeed. No, it's not necessary," Sophie insisted. On the way to the hospital, the old woman expressed her gratitude to Sophie and shared stories about her grandson, Douglas. It seemed he was a very commendable young man. The grandmother was concerned about him, as he had been hospitalized with injuries after a car accident. And then the elderly woman got off at her stop, and the rest of the way Sophie traveled in silence. The chatty woman had momentarily distracted her from her anxious thoughts and eased her excitement. But as soon as Sophie was alone again, her worries turned, maneuvering in her mind. The luxurious atmosphere of the restaurant heightened Sophie's excitement. She immediately noticed the table where Ron and his parents were sitting. Upon spotting her, Ron greeted her with a smile, approached her, embraced, and complimented her appearance. All of this, of course, lifted Sophie's spirits. She always felt safe next to Ron, as it later turned out, falsely. Ron's parents looked exactly as Sophie had imagined them. His father, an athletic and well-groomed man, with elegant grey hair at his temples, had a tan and handsome features with dimples on his cheeks. It was clear who the son resembled. The mother was also well-groomed, appeared as if she frequented beauty parlors. Her face was smooth with flawless skin, impeccable manicure, and regal posture and cold gaze from her light blue eyes. Sophie felt as if she had been hit by an icy shower when she looked at her. At that moment she understood everything on an intuitive level, although hope for a favorable outcome still lingered in her mind. "Well, hello, dear young lady." Ron's father greeted Sophie without a smile. "Good evening," the girl greeted with a broad smile. "Finally, we meet you," Ron's mother said, stretching her lips into a semblance of a polite smile, but her eyes remained serious and cold. Everyone introduced themselves, and the waiter brought their order. Initially, the conversation revolved around trivial topics: the weather, city news. Sophie inserted her own lines periodically, trying to be an active participant in the conversation. After each of her statements, Ron's parents exchanged meaningful glances. Sophie observed their reactions attentively, as did Ron. He looked at his parents' faces, trying to gauge their emotions. At that moment, he appeared less like an independent adult and more like a small child, and Sophie didn't particularly like that change. "Tell us a little about yourself," Ron's mother asked, "as Ron is serious about you because he doesn't introduce us to every girlfriend he has. Although, of course, this is not the first time it has happened. Ron tends to fall in love easily. Nevertheless, I would like to know more about you." Sophie was taken aback by the mention of "not the first time." It was clearly insinuated that she was not unique and one of a kind, but rather one of many. The tone of this wealthy, well-groomed woman was hostile, with a metallic edge to her voice, and so Sophie began to speak. Ron's parents occasionally asked clarifying questions about her mother, her father, her work, and her educational background. The girls' answers elicited a strange reaction from them. They exchanged glances and smirked. It was unpleasant. As for Ron, he sat next to his mother in silence. He didn't even attempt to lighten the atmosphere or support his girlfriend. "And why sewing school?" Ron's mother asked. "You probably didn't perform well in school. Otherwise you would have gone to college and gotten a more promising field, wouldn't you?" Sophie let the barb pass by her ears. It was clear that this lady was trying to hurt her, to provoke a reaction, but she wouldn't give her the satisfaction. Sophie did well in school, very well in fact. It's just she had to start working earlier. Her family's financial situation was very precarious. However, she wasn't going to explain all of that to these people at the moment. Meanwhile, the conversation became increasingly unpleasant, with Ron's parents asking more and more personal questions and making unpleasant remarks. It felt as if they were dissecting Sophie from the inside out. The girl spoke about herself, but felt ashamed of her own biography, even though she hadn't done anything wrong to anyone. Von's mother thus commented on everything that Sophie said, that the girl felt herself next to these people as a poor and limited dullard who did not have enough brains for higher education, a lazy girl dreaming of getting a rich heir and thus solve her life problems. Or maybe that's what she really was. A sudden realization struck Sophie, under the unfriendly woman's icy gaze, that she really counted on Ron's help in the treatment of her mother. As for Ron, he remained silent, and Sophie felt betrayed as he made no attempt to defend her. It was completely out of character for him and left the girl even more confused. Ron had always been by her side, supporting and encouraging her. Now he resembled a scared little boy, afraid of his parents' disapproval. At that moment, Sophie realized the truth. She and Ron would never have a future together. His parents had made it abundantly clear to their son. Their goal was not simply to humiliate Sophie. but to show their only heir that she was not a suitable match. They wanted to ensure that their son understood that the girl who lived alone with her sick mother in a small apartment, working as a seamstress, was not his equal. And Ron had learned this lesson perfect. He would never go against his parents' will. He was too dependent on them. Tears welled up in Sophie's eyes. Why did she have to endure this? What had she done wrong to these people? She stood up from her seat and said, I've figured it all out. I have to go. She wasn't going to burst into tears in front of that family. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Sophie hurriedly made her way to the restaurant's exit. No one tried to stop her. She still hoped against all odds that Ron would chase after her because he had made it clear that he loved her, as he had repeatedly claimed. Yet Ron remained with his parents. Outside, the girl burst into tears. Fortunately, it was raining heavily, concealing her tears from others. Passers-by sought shelter under awnings to wait out the downpour, but Sophie continued walking, oblivious to the inconvenience. Her mind was in a tumultuous state. How could Ron do this to her? She had so much faith in him, believing that she had found her soulmate at such a young age, but it turned out that she had been deluding herself. Ron was only interested in her as a passing fancy. He was accustomed to dating spoiled princesses, and Sophie, a humble girl who had never experienced anything bright or exciting, must have been a refreshing change for him. It must have been gratifying for him to play the role of a generous benefactor, opening up a world of possibilities for the poor girl. Clearly, he didn't have genuine feelings for her. Otherwise, Ron would not have sat there like a statue, while his mother humiliated her before his very eyes. Now Sophie was sitting in a mall, drinking one cup of coffee after another. Her hair had almost completely dried, curling beautifully. Her dress was also almost dry, and she had regained enough composure to face her mother. She would act as if nothing had happened, even if her heart felt heavy. Her mother must not notice. She had to protect her, the only person in the world who truly loved her and always would. Perhaps all men were the same as Ron. They could sweet-talk and then discard you once they had had their fun. Maybe her own father had been the same. Sophia returned home and went straight to the bathroom, asked, lying in the bedroom and clutching her heart. It was aching again. "Yes," the girl replied with a careless smile. "I got completely soaked. I want to take a hot shower so I don't get sick. I'll make you some tea." "No, you rest. I'll do it myself." In the shower, Sophie shed a few more tears. This time, they brought relief and washed away the negative emotions. Since that evening, Sophie had been acting like nothing had happened, but her mother still noticed the changes in her daughter. It was impossible to hide anything from her attentive gaze. "Did you have a quarrel with Ron?" "Oh, how did you know?" "Well, for one thing, you're not going out anymore. That's hard to miss. And secondly, you've been wearing a sad expression lately." "Yes, we broke up." Sophie nodded. "Turns out he's a bit of a mama's boy. Good thing I realized it in time. Did he hurt you?" "No, I just imagined him. That's why I'm sad, but I'll be smarter from now on." Sophie smiled broadly, assuring her mother that everything was fine, but deep down she was still in pain. Her dreams of a happy life with the man she loved had been shattered. Sophie still longingly remembered the Ron she had imagined before their meeting in the restaurant. She had thought he was perfect, and then she realized that such a person probably didn't exist at all. It was painful and frightening. Sophie tried to carry on with her life, working, meeting people, and reading a lot. To distract herself, she constantly cleaned the apartment. The house was spotlessly clean, but her soul remained heavy and burdened. And then came the long-awaited appointment with the professor. Sophie went to the clinic with her mother. The professor turned out to be a tall, thin man in his 50s with sharp blue eyes. He carefully reviewed the medical history of the patient, said nothing, but ordered several additional tests. All the necessary procedures were carried out without waiting in the same clinic. Sophie was delighted with the attentive care. It was nothing like the local clinic. As it turned out, the professor was rushing for a reason. Out of his experience, he immediately realized the severity of the case. After all the tests, they returned to the office. The professor was ready to deliver his verdict. "Well, I have nothing good to tell you," he said, waving his hands. "I can't believe that such a quite young woman has such a condition. Your heart is worn out and barely functioning. Medication won't help. We need to perform surgery." Sophie gripped her mother's hands tightly as she listened intently to the doctor, trying to remain calm. "The surgery should have been done a long time ago. I don't understand how your primary doctor let the situation deteriorate like this." Irritation was evident in the professor's voice. "You could even consider suing him later, but for now the main focus is the operation." The professor then provided the details. The upcoming operation was complex, very complex. Every cardiac surgeon would be willing to perform it on a patient in such a condition. Treatment in the capital was necessary, which meant travel, accommodation, and payment for expensive medications. And the operation itself cost some money. Insurance didn't cover everything. Sophie and her mother had no way of coming up with such a sum, unless they sold their apartment and ended up on the street. "It must be done as soon as possible," said the professor seriously, looking at the bewildered visitors. "Every day counts." "What happens if I don't have the operation?" asked Helen. "I can't imagine where we would get that kind of money. Is medicine therapy an option?" "No," the doctor replied. "Medication won't help, only surgery." On the way home, both mother and daughter remained silent, lost in their own thoughts. The woman faced a difficult choice: to fight or accept the situation as it was, knowing that the odds were stacked against them. Sophie feverishly searched for a way out, seeing no other option but to fight for her mother's life until the very end. Once home, the first thing the girl did was call every charitable foundation. Sophie hoped for their help and was certain they would assist, but no one was willing to help. She received different responses to her appeals. Some said that they only specialized in helping sick children, as if adults didn't face difficult situations or have a desire to live. Others gave unclear refusals without providing reasons. Only in one place did Sophie get some clarity. "You see," explained the woman who answered the call with a guilty voice, "your situation isn't spectacular enough. People feel sorry for little children and donate money to them. They also help the mothers of these children so that they don't become orphans. But your mother is an adult, working, and she has already raised her daughter, so there's practically no chance people will respond to your request." Sophie was grateful to her interlocutor for this harsh truth. At least now she understood why all funds were rejecting them, and it meant that they had to find other ways to overcome their difficult situation. "Mum, let's lower the price of the apartment so that we can find a buyer soon," the girl suggested. "What do you mean?" sighed her mother. "We don't even know if the operation will help or not. Plus, if we sell the apartment, you'll be left without a home." "No!" Sophie exclaimed. "No, don't even think about it. We'll find the money." Sophie dedicated every free minute to searching for job vacancies. She was ready for anything to make money, but she quickly realized that this wasn't a solution. By the time she secured a job and worked for a couple of months to apply for a loan, precious time would be lost. Sophie felt desperate. She cried every day out of helplessness, concealing her tears from her mother. But Helen, on the other hand, seemed surprisingly calm. She appeared to have accepted her fate and didn't even attempt to do anything, knowing it would be futile. One day, Sophie took a desperate step. With no one else to turn to, she dialed Ron's number. Yes, they hadn't communicated all this time. Ron didn't call, didn't write, and didn't even attempt to apologize to his parents at the restaurant. It seemed he was content with the fact that Sophie had disappeared from his life. After everything that had happened, the girl despised Ron, reading him as a small-minded mama's boy. Even his name itself irritated her. She deleted all the joint photos so that she wouldn't accidentally stumble upon them on her phone. Those pictures hurt her again. She was so happy in them, so in love, and had no idea what lay ahead. But anyway, only Ron could help her. He was wealthy and would probably lend her the necessary amount, even with interest, just to get the money as soon as possible. The bank would never have given Sophie such a loan. Her solvency was too low. Of course, it wasn't easy to dial Ron's number, but it was for her mum's sake. If not for her illness, Sophie, of course, would never turn to him. Ron answered immediately. His voice sounded a little surprised, but the guilt or remorse in it did not sound. Ron spoke to Sophie as if nothing had happened, as if he had a former classmate suddenly called. "About your upset feelings now, I just don't like that sort of thing. It's all in the past. Let's move on." "It's not about my upset feelings at all," sighed Sophie. "You see my mum, she's very sick. I've told you, remember? She has a heart problem." "I remember something like that. So, what's up?" "Well, she needs surgery or she's going to die." "I'm sorry, that's sad. I hope she's going to be okay. The problem is the operation isn't free. It costs a lot of money, and the insurance doesn't cover everything. We don't have that kind of money, and there's nowhere to get it." "Ah, that makes sense." Ron grinned. "Wow, my mum turned out to be a visionary. She warned me that this is how it will be." "What do you mean?" Sophie asked. "She said that, since the fish is off the hook, you'll try to snatch your loot differently." "Really, Mum? Thought it would be a heartbreaking story about your own illness, or the news of your suddenly discovered pregnancy. But you brought your mother into it." Sophie was taken aback. Did Ron really think she was just trying to spin him for money? Did he completely understand nothing about her while they were dating? How can Ron say that? It's hurtful, painful, hard, unfair. And these reproaches and accusations of mercantilism hurt her soul. However, Sophie took herself in hand. She couldn't show weakness and take offense now. Ron was her last hope. "Ron, listen, it's not true. I can show you the medical papers, the professor's report, the price list of the clinic. It's all easy to make up," the man argued. "The professor will call you himself." "I'll ask him." "Are you kidding me? That call could be made by anyone. Do you think I'm a fool?" "Ron, it's true. I'll prove it. And besides, I'm not just asking for money. I'll pay it back. I'll pay both the debt and the interest. The main thing is to pay for the operation as soon as possible. They won't give me a loan. My salary is too small." "Well, how are you going to pay the debt then? You've said that you can't afford the loan." "I'll work part-time, day and night. But I need the money right now," Sophie said, and looked with pleading at Ron, but he stayed adamant. "Yeah, that's a truly heartbreaking story. But it's a shame that such talent is wasted. You could write novels or play at the theater." "Ron, it's true." "I'm sick of it," replied the man sharply, tired of listening to this nonsense. "And after all, I initially still felt guilty that it all turned out so. You seemed to me a naive and sincere girl, and now I see that my mother was right, accurately predicted your behavior." "That's it, don't call me again," said Ron, and hung up. Sophie dialed Ron's number again and again. She thought that she simply had failed to convey to him the seriousness of the situation. She should explain it better, he would understand, but Ron seemed to have blocked her number. That's all. The last hope evaporated like dew on a hot summer day. Sophie had no idea who else to turn to, and Ron again trampled and humiliated her, made it clear that he considered her as a fraud. Tears spurted from the girl's eyes. She couldn't and didn't want to hold them back. She'd been crying a lot lately. Sophie was at the bus stop. Good thing there were no other people around. How would they react to a girl sobbing at the top of her lungs? Sophie powerlessly sank on the bench, wrapping her arms around herself. Her whole body was trembling uncontrollably. It felt like hysteria. Sophie was exhausted from fighting, tired of being rejected after knocking on every door, and then, wrong, she had turned to the man who had once trampled and humiliated her, and he had done it again. But the worst part was that Sophie couldn't help her mum. Helen had become weaker right before Sophie's eyes, unable to even go to work anymore and stuck on endless sick leave. The boss even threatened to dismiss her. Who would want such an employee? If it weren't for Sophie, her mother would be feeling much better now. Even the professor mentioned that the pregnancy and childbirth had greatly affected her health. Large tears streamed down Sophie's cheeks, making it hard for her to catch her breath as she tried to hold back her sobs. Suddenly, a car stopped right in front of her. Probably it was just someone getting dropped off at the bus stop. It happens. Sophie tried her best to calm down, not wanting to scare people away, but it was no use. The window of the front passenger's seat slowly rolled down, and Sophie met the gaze of grey, attentive eyes. It was a young man, slightly older than Sophie. He looked at her with interest, while she continued to sob uncontrollably. See, I was right. I've told you something was wrong with her. I noticed it from afar, came an elderly voice from the back seat. The man turned to the invisible stranger and absent-mindedly nodded, then turned his attention back to Sophie. Hey, young lady, what's wrong? Do you need any help? No, Sophie objected. She suddenly felt ashamed for sitting and crying in front of these strangers. People had stopped because of her. They were surely on their way somewhere, maybe even in a hurry. No, don't be embarrassed if someone offended you or something happened, the man continued. Just then, the back door of the car opened and an elderly woman stepped out. She wore a light pantsuit, her grey hair elegantly styled. This woman looked nothing like the lady on the bus, who couldn't afford the fare. But yet it was her, Mrs. Looper. Sophie recognized her. What a coincidence. It wasn't a small town. What were the chances of them meeting again? And yet it happened. Oh my goodness, I know you. Mrs. Looper smiled kindly and warmly. Douglas, this is the girl from the bus. Remember? I've told you that story, the one who paid for me. I was on my way to visit you in the hospital. The man also got out of the car. Now the grandmother and grandson stood opposite Sophie, whose tears even dried up from surprise. Well, of course I remember the story. The grandson smiled at his grandmother, then looked at Sophie. Can you imagine? I had a minor accident. I had to spend the night at the hospital just for observation. I didn't even want to tell my grandmother, but it turned out that one of her friends worked there as a nurse. So she found out and dropped everything, bought a year's worth of goodies and necessities and went to the hospital. You're being sarcastic again, Mrs. Looper reproachfully looked at her adult grandson. But you'll understand me when you have a child of your own and put your heart and soul into him. Then we'll talk about unnecessary worries and concerns again. Sophie was delighted to witness this friendly banter. They were kind-hearted and caring people who clearly loved each other very much. You know, for some reason back then I thought that your grandson was a boy or a teenager, Sophie confessed. For me, he always will be my little one, even though he's already almost 2 meters tall and has long provided for himself. Mrs. Looper smiled. Now what's troubling you, dear? Don't be shy, tell me. You're a kind girl who helped me back then and didn't remain indifferent. Maybe we can do something for you too. Sophie let out a sigh. How could these people help her? Sophie faced unsolvable problems, and no one in the whole world could assist her. That she really wanted to share her misfortune with someone. Douglas, his grandmother. They would listen to her, that's for sure, and at least sympathize, pity her. Sophie realized that all this time she had been hiding her worries from others. Even with her mother, she couldn't share her innermost feelings because of her bad heart. And here they were, potential listeners, asking her to open her heart. Well, That's precisely what Sophie needed. "So, can you finally tell us what happened to you?" Mrs. Looper asked again. "And aren't you in a hurry?" Sophie clarified. "My story isn't too short." "We're not rushing," the grandmother and grandson replied together. "All right," she nodded her head. "But before, I suggest we find somewhere nicer a place to settle," Douglas said, looking around. "There seems to be a nice pizzeria over there. How about that?" "I'm in," his grandmother immediately responded. "Me too," nodded Sophie, frantically thinking about how much money she had left on her card. "That's great." The cozy atmosphere, stylish furniture, and pleasant music in the pizzeria created a conducive environment for conversation. Despite Sophie's objection, Douglas insisted on paying for the order. They settled down at a table, hidden behind a rack of fresh flowers. "Now tell us all about your troubles," smiled the elderly woman, "and we'll all think together on how to help you." "All right," Sophie nodded, still puzzled as to why these people would listen to her, let alone help her. So what if she paid for her on the bus? It's nothing. It's not worth even discussing. And Sophie proceeded to tell them everything about her life, with her mother in a tiny apartment, and about the constant feeling of guilt for her life and health that Sophie had experienced from a very young age. She mentioned Ron. She didn't go into details about the behavior of Ron's parents, but simply mentioned that they made it clear she wasn't a good match for their son, and that she broke up with her fiancé afterwards. This part of the story wasn't particularly relevant, but Sophie felt the need to share her disappointment in her beloved man. "Rotten people," said Mrs. Looper. "Nothing good will come into their lives. They will marry their son off to a suitable lady, but there will be no love or harmony. I've seen many examples of this. Life will punish Ron and his parents more than once." Douglas said nothing, but he looked at Sophie with such sympathy, such empathy, that words were unnecessary. Then the girl talked about the consultation with the distinguished professor and his verdict. "And now, my mum needs an expensive operation urgently. I've tried to find the money. I've done everything. I even turned to Ron, but he said that I was a scammer. That's why I burst into tears at the bus stop after talking to him." "What a fool!" exclaimed the elderly woman in her heart. "He doesn't know anything about people. I see you for the second time in my life, and I understand that you are a very honest and modest girl, yet he has known you for so long and hasn't realized anything. He is a real fool. In short, I have nowhere to get the money," summarized Sophie, "and without the surgery, my mum. The girl couldn't bring herself to say the terrible word, but the listeners understood. Mrs. Looper put her arm around Sophie's shoulders and started stroking her head. Sophie cried, unable to stop these foolish tears. For the first time, she was truly being listened to. For the first time, she was being sympathized with. That meant a lot. But the trouble didn't go away. The problems didn't disappear on their own, and money didn't materialize out of thin air. The old woman comforted Sophie with soothing words, making her feel better. Meanwhile, Douglas stared at them in silence, lost in thought. "How much money are we talking about?" the man finally asked. Sophie provided the figures, which were driving herself to panic. Douglas raised his eyebrows in surprise. "And there's no way this operation can be done for free. And there's no way this operation can be done for free." "It can," replied Sophie, who had regained control of her emotions, with the help of the kind woman. Sophie cried again, unable to stop these foolish tears. For the first time, she was truly being listened to. For the first time, she was being sympathized with. That meant a lot. But the trouble didn't go away. The problems didn't disappear on their own, and money didn't materialize out of thin air. The old woman comforted Sophie with soothing words, making her feel better. Meanwhile, Douglas stared at them in silence, lost in thought. "How much money are we talking about?" the man finally asked. Sophie provided the figures, which were driving herself to panic. Douglas raised his eyebrows in surprise. "And there's no way this operation can be done for free." "It can," replied Sophie, who had regained control of her emotions with the help of the kind woman. "You can get it for free, but you have to wait in line for almost a year. My mum doesn't have that much time." "Well, I am willing to contribute such a sum for her treatment," said Douglas. The grandmother looked at her grandson with pride and approval, while Sophie looked at him in surprise. Could Douglas provide such a large sum of money? He didn't seem like a rich man at all. He dressed modestly. His car was good but not fancy like Ron's. Besides, how could she accept such a generous gift from almost strangers? "I'm afraid I don't think I can accept that amount of money. It just doesn't seem right." "It's right and fair," reassured Mrs. Looper. "You helped me in a difficult situation, and now Douglas is helping you. It's like a boomerang. Have you heard of it? But the sums are very different." "So what?" the elderly lady persisted. "It's a matter of opportunities. Don't worry," smiled Douglas, placing his warm palm on Sophie's hand in a friendly and comforting gesture. "I do have the means. Besides, I set aside a certain amount of money for charity every year. It's a firm rule, so—" Sophie couldn't understand anything. If Douglas was such a rich man, why didn't his grandmother have enough money to travel with him? "Douglas is a good boy, a successful businessman," proudly declared the elderly lady. "I raised him from infancy after his parents died. I'm not even his real grandmother, just a lonely neighbor who couldn't bear the thought of my nice neighbor's child ending up in an orphanage. I took him in and raised him as my own grandchild, and he was smart and serious from a young age. I knew he would go far, and he did." "Grandma never misses a chance to brag about me," smiled Douglas. "But she's right. I've managed to build a successful business that generates a stable income. We specialize in custom-made furniture and have branches in many cities. Therefore, I allocate a certain amount for charity every year. Let this year be for your mum. Moreover, it seems like fate itself orchestrated our meeting. What were the odds of us crossing paths exactly when you were sobbing in despair and helplessness at the bus stop? Such coincidences just don't happen. So you can really give us that much money?" Sophie still couldn't believe her luck. "But I just can't accept it for nothing. Let's make it as a loan. I'll repay the debt little by little until it's fully paid." "Oh, you're so stubborn," Mrs. Looper exclaimed, throwing her hands up. "I understand your hesitation." "Oh." Douglas shook his head, looking at Sophie with care. "So, here's my new proposal. I've been wanting to invest in a new venture for a while. We can establish a company for you, an atelier that specializes in custom-made clothing. Based on your story, it seems like you're a talented dressmaker. Your mum's medical bills can be a part of the investment in this atelier. Eventually, when the business starts generating profits, which it will, because I'm good at that sort of thing, you can gradually repay me from the investor's share of the profits. Do you understand?" Sophie nodded. It all felt like some kind of fairy tale. Investments, a new company, an interesting job, and most importantly, money for her mum's surgery. Was this really happening? The girl was suddenly afraid that now she would wake up and it would turn out that she just saw a wonderful dream. But no, everything turned out to be true. They all exchanged their phone numbers. "Call me when your heart feels heavy," said the elderly lady. "And don't disappear. You're a wonderful person, and I enjoy talking to you." And then everything started to move quickly. Sophie's life was changing day by day. These changes even made her feel a little dizzy. First, Sophie's mother was sent to the capital clinic for surgery. Douglas not only paid for the necessary medical procedures, but also organized everything down to the last detail. He bought tickets, arranged rent for Sophie, arranged a comfortable room for her mother, and found all the rare medicines on the list. Sophie couldn't have done it herself, especially not so quickly, and Douglas, he solved all the problems as if by magic. He was truly wonderful. Douglas was a man of few words, especially outside of business. Unlike his grandmother, he was quite reserved. Often, Douglas and Sophie would travel together for work, and they would both remain silent. But the silence was not uncomfortable. It was warm and accepting. Sophie was perfectly aware that she had been falling in love with him. Well, it was easy. He was just perfect. But every time she had these thoughts, she would restrain herself because Douglas probably had a girlfriend. He wasn't married, there was no wedding ring, but surely he wasn't single. His chosen one must be perfect too, some beautiful woman with a model appearance, a pure soul, and impeccable manners. Sophie could never compare to that, so Sophie could only dream from time to time that one day Douglas would notice her as a woman. But these dreams remained impossible. Or so it seemed to Sophie, for 2 weeks while her mother was recovering in the capital. Every day she visited her mother, brought her treats and cheered her up. The doctor said the operation was successful and even joked that the patient managed to jump into the last carriage of the departing train. Just a little more and, well, Douglas and his grandmother came to save Sophie and her mother at just the right time. Douglas's grandmother was always in touch. She asked about Sophie's mother's health, rejoiced with the girl at her apparent improvement. She also suggested places to visit in the capital during Sophie's spare time. It was very exciting, as she had never been there before. Douglas would also often call, but their conversations were mostly business-related. He was busy registering a new company. Sophie was supposed to be its director and chief designer. This made Sophie slightly worried. Would she be able to handle it? No, she could design and sew new models. That was her talent. It was great that she would finally have the opportunity to earn money doing something she truly loved, something that inspired her. She had long felt like she was wasting her talent working as a simple dressmaker in an atelier. Fitting clothes to someone's figure was completely different from creating custom-made outfits. It was a way for her imagination to fly. But now, she would also have to deal with paperwork and other issues, because Sophie would be the director and co-owner of the company. However, it was all right. She would manage. The most important thing was that her mother was saved. Now Sophie was going to do her best to make the company prosper, and that Douglas did not regret his decision. She would repay him the full amount, and even more. Time passed, and her mother was discharged from the hospital, and they both returned home full of plans and hopes for a new life. Helen looked like a healthy woman, full of energy again, and she even went back to her work as a seamstress, but now at Sophie's company. Sophie threw herself into her new business. The work was demanding, but it also inspired her and brought her joy. She couldn't be happier with what she was doing now. Douglas helped her with the documents and legal matters without even needing to be asked. It was as if he had some inner instinct that told him when and where there were problems, and he solved them effortlessly and playfully, just as he always did. Sophie fought with herself, trying not to reveal her feelings for him. He had saved her in a difficult and seemingly hopeless situation. Of course, that role as her savior sparked romantic feelings in Sophie. But did Douglas need that? Probably not. He was just a good man who couldn't ignore the misfortune of a sobbing girl at the bus stop, especially when he had the means to help her. He was also a businessman who decided to try a new project, a tailor shop. It had the potential to be profitable, and that's why he got involved. Nothing more. On occasion, he spoke harshly and curtly with his subordinates, especially with those he wasn't close to. Once he shared a bit about his life with Sophie. It happened one evening while they were up late working in the port. Douglas had lost his parents at a young age. Their wooden house caught fire. A vigilant laborer, Mrs. Looper, had pulled the fire department in time. They arrived quickly, but it was too late to save the house. Douglas was fortunate. His mother put him down for an afternoon nap in a stroller in the yard, while she herself was busy in the kitchen. Unfortunately, a fire broke out, trapping both of Douglas's parents. However, Douglas was unharmed. The concerned neighbor who raised the alarm took the boy in. She had always admired Douglas's parents, considering them hard-working and a good couple. She often spoke highly of them and their ambitions for success. They could have achieved so much in life if it weren't for the fire, she would occasionally lament. Now, you have to live for 3 and fulfill all your parents' plans and dreams. Douglas took this to heart and worked hard to make his parents proud. He excelled in his studies and even found time for hobbies and extra classes. Even as a child, Douglas showed talent in making simple furniture. At the age of 15, he and a few friends sold their creations in his garage. The lightweight chairs and tables quickly sold out, and by his 20th, he had his own company with employees and suppliers. He then decided to attend a local college to learn how to properly and legally conduct his business. He successfully listened to the economic program and eventually expanded his little company. Sophie was even more interested with Douglas after hearing his story. What an incredible man! From making homemade furniture to owning a network of furniture production. Amazing! Lucky for his girlfriend. I wonder what she's like. And how does she feel about the fact that her beloved literally disappears day and night to work with his furniture mini-empire? And now with my atelier, thought Sophie sometimes. Over time, she became more business-savvy and started handling most issues on her own, without relying on Douglas's help. She even fulfilled her long-standing dream of getting her driver's license and buying a car. Sophie was a cautious driver, but unfortunately she couldn't control the actions of other reckless drivers on the road. One day she encountered a driver who was breaking the rules of the road. It happened at an intersection and the airbag failed to deploy. Sophie hit her head on the steering wheel, resulting in a minor forehead injury. An ambulance arrived and took her to the hospital, where she received a few stitches. As Sophie sat in the treatment room and the surgeon worked on her forehead. Because of the painkiller, she wasn't feeling any pain and her mind was preoccupied with the damage to her car. When the tow truck took the car away, Sophie didn't have a chance to see the extent of the damage, but it was clearly more severe than her own injury. After the surgeon finished, Sophie was moved to a hospital ward. "Can I leave now? I feel fine, and there's a lot of work waiting for me today," she asked. "No," the doctor shook his head. "You'll need to spend 24 hours in the hospital to rule out a concussion." Sophie was bored in her ward. She had told her mother that she would spend the night at her friend's house, not mentioning the accident. Sophie, as usual, tried keeping her mother far from stress, even though her health was not a cause for concern anymore. As Sophie was lying on the bed scrolling through her newsfeed, the door of her ward opened with a loud noise. Douglas stood in the doorway, his hair disheveled and anxiety in his eyes. Seeing Sophie staring at him in surprise, he jumped up to her and hugged her tightly. "I was so afraid of losing you." A wave of warmth washed over Sophie as Douglas spoke these words sincerely. He cared about her. She pressed herself against him with delight. She had of this moment for so long. "I was afraid something serious had happened to you," Douglas said, pulling back slightly and looking into Sophie's eyes. "I saw a photo of your mangled car in the local news. I recognized the license plates. It said that the driver was taken to the hospital in serious condition. I couldn't bear the thought of losing you." "I'm fine," Sophie smiled. "They exaggerated a bit to make it more interesting for people to read. I just have a scratch on my forehead. The doctor put a couple of stitches, that's all." Douglas smiled back. "I suppose there's no reason to keep it a secret any longer. I held back because I didn't want to cause you any embarrassment or discomfort. It's hard to pinpoint exactly when, but I realized I had feelings for you. It could have been during the story of your ordeal at the pizza joint, or perhaps it solidified while we were coordinating your mum's medical care. I'm not entirely sure. But to me, you embody sincerity, honesty, and beauty like no one else I've ever encountered. Learning about your accident today struck me with a fear of possibly losing you, a fear I've never known before," he confessed. Sophie's smile in response was gentle, filled with unspoken words. She believed that Douglas could see the depth of her feelings in her gaze, even if she wasn't ready to voice them just yet. It seems you're now experiencing what your grandmother once did, Sophie said, her smile broadening. Recall her words at the bus stop about one day, understanding the fear for a loved one's safety. It looks like that day has arrived. Douglas's eyes shimmered with realization and joy. Granny was right, as she always is, and that applies to everything.